5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live, coming to you live on this breaking news night. The U.S. strikes Iran. 3 facilities in Iran have been bombed by the United States of America, Dad. Maybe an historic night.
Yes, this may be the most important Lichtman Live we've ever had.
Really?
Yes. We've had some pretty important ones.
We've had some pretty important ones.
But we sit here tonight within, I guess, just hours of the United States engaging in, once again, major military action in the Middle East. In this case, bombing 3 nuclear facilities located deeply within the sovereign nation of Iran. This, of course, is not the first time in modern history that the United States has engaged in significant military action in the Middle East. And how well have those actions gone, Sam?
Not very well.
Not very well. I mean, start with Jimmy Carter's attempt in 1980 to send American rescue forces into Iran to rescue the American hostages. It was a disaster. They never got there. Planes crashed, helicopters, Americans died. It was a fiasco. Then, of course, we had the war in Afghanistan, America's longest war, dragged on for a couple of decades. And what was the result of that? Did we liberate Afghanistan?
No, isn't the Taliban back in power already?
The Taliban is back in power, stronger than ever. And then, of course, there was the invasion of Iraq. And I'll never forget how early in that war, I guess after they knocked out Saddam Hussein, President George W. Bush, who ordered the invasion of Iraq, went on a aircraft carrier with a big banner behind him, mission accomplished. Was the mission accomplished?
Was it ever accomplished?
Never. Not even close. The war dragged on for years with American casualties and, God knows, large numbers of Iraqi casualties. And to this day, we failed to create a stable democratic nation in Iraq. So there should be bright red warning signals and loud blaring alarms as a result of any attempted military action in the most unpredictable, most unstable region of the world, the Middle East. And let me tell you, Donald Trump is now blustering. You know, Iran never should have a nuclear weapon. We have to attack them to prevent it. But what was the root of all this? Why are we here now, Sam?
The ending of the Iran deal.
Exactly. If you followed our show, we went through the Iran nuclear accords that started in 2016 under President Obama in detail. And they showed that Iran would not even be able to begin to approach the threshold of a nuclear weapon, which is where they are now. According to American intelligence, they're not actually building a weapon. They're at the threshold. Trump, of course, discards that with no evidence, just as he discarded the findings of his own intelligence community that Russia meddled on his behalf in 2016. He never deals in facts. He only deals in things that serve him. 2031. That's how long that deal was lasting, and only then would it even begin the multi-year-long process to get to the threshold of being able to develop a nuclear or atomic weapon. And he didn't pull out because it wasn't working. No, his own, again, administration twice in 2017, shortly before he withdrew, said the accords were working. Iran was complying with the restrictions. The international inspectors agreed. Trump had no reason to pull out of that deal, except he wanted to obliterate anything that had Obama's name on it. And what did he promise when he pulled out of the deal, Sam?
He'd get us a better one.
Yeah, and now what, 7 years later? Where's the better deal?
And let's say, he is as successful as he, in his wildest dreams, think he will be. It's essentially him creating the problem, fixing it, and being like, I'm the hero, even if he does fix it, right?
Right, and it's by no means clear what a fix means.
Right.
At this point, we have no idea to what extent they've crippled the ability of Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Maybe they've moved a lot of their facilities. We don't know if the bombs that hit Fordow, the deep underground facility, actually destroyed it. And, I hate to quote this guy, but he was right about Iraq.
Who?
Defense Secretary Rumsfeld. You know what he said?
Tell me.
He said, we are confronting known unknowns and a plethora of unknown unknowns. And that's exactly what's happening now. There are known unknowns, like to what extent have we damaged their threshold nuclear capacities. Then there are all kinds of unknown unknowns. What effect is this going to have on the regime in Iran? Is this really the end, or is regime change a option? As we know, our attempts to change regimes, which Trump himself has roundly criticized, has been a disaster in places like Libya and Iraq. We just don't have the capacity to do so. And in fact, back in the Obama administration, Trump blasted Obama. You know why? Because he said Obama wants to attack Iran. All of the things that Trump has said, we're not going to get involved in any wars. Regime change is a disaster. It was a huge mistake to go into the Middle East. He's now violated, as, not just liberals, but some of his staunchest supporters, people I don't agree with on anything, like Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others, have said, this contradicts everything that Trump promised and everything that he was elected on. The unknown unknowns, what are the consequences of this? Is this just going to strengthen and tighten the Iran regime? Are they going to retaliate against the U.S., attacking U.S. bases in places like Iraq and Syria, launching terrorist attacks on the U.S. itself, and perhaps closing down the Persian Gulf, which would spike oil prices and undermine our economy? Who knows at this point? But I do know one thing. Who is the big beneficiary of all this, Sam?
Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin. Once again, as he has done so many times, Trump is playing right into the hands of Vladimir Putin for three reasons, really. Number one, to the extent we're focusing on the Middle East, what does that do to our support for Ukraine, which Trump was always lukewarm about anyway? What does that do, Sam?
Pulls resources away.
Yes, it totally diverts from supporting Ukraine. And remember, Putin's number one objective, one he's spent so much prestige, so much treasure, produced so many lost Russian lives on, is to gobble up as much territory from the sovereign nation of Ukraine, ultimately conquer it as part of his plan to reestablish the Russian Empire. Secondly, it plays right into the hands of Putin, because if Iran retaliates, they're not going to retaliate against Russia, are they?
No.
They retaliate against the U.S. And remember, Putin is not our friend. He is a murderous dictator who kills his political opponents and wants to destroy democracy wherever he finds it. Finally, if they do close the Persian Gulf and oil prices go up and it harms the American economy, who benefits?
Tell me.
Russia, because they are dependent on oil revenues. Their economy is reeling. They're talking about a deep recession. Nothing would be more beneficial to Russia than a spike in oil prices, as disastrous as it would be to the United States and our democratic allies.
And just to give some update, in 2 minutes, Trump is supposed to be giving an address to the nation about these strikes. So we will be watching that live.
And commenting.
So stay tuned for that. I want to ask you, Dad, so what do you think in Trump's mind is the best case scenario here? I'm just trying to imagine. Like, okay, he does these strikes. It's the only strikes he needs to do. Iran comes begging to the table. and they put together this new deal that, doesn't give any money to Iran and et cetera, and they sign a new deal and they don't have weapons anymore. Is that like best case scenario?
That is
in Trump's
his
mind?
ultimate dream, his absolute best case scenario, that Iran is so frightened that they come scurrying to the negotiating table and give Trump everything he wants. Another one of those unknown unknowns.
Right.
I guess it's possible. And I'm not, a military expert or a Middle East expert, but I listen to some of those who have real expertise in this area, and they've said that's very unlikely.
And so, worst case scenario is American boots on the ground in Iran. Is that the full spectrum there?
I think that's also unlikely, but that is the yin to the yang, absolutely, the alpha to the omega of the best versus the worst case scenario. The most likely is, the Iraq and Afghanistan scenario, a long, simmering, draining war in the Middle East to no conclusive end.
Well, there was boots on the ground in both of those countries, though.
That's correct. And there's a reason for that. You don't bomb countries into submission. In Vietnam, we dropped more ordnance than we did on that little country on all the nations of the world in World War II. And did we win that war, the Vietnam War?
No.
No. And obviously in World War II, the only bombing that ended a war was what? The atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And Japan was already on the verge of collapse by the time they dropped the atomic bomb. So it's very important to listen very carefully. Now, there's another issue, is what Trump did legal.
Oh.
A very murky issue. Congress has the power to declare war, and the framers envisioned that only Congress would bring us into wars. Of course, we know over time that's not been the case. What was our last declared war?
World War II.
World War II. So the commander-in-chief has tremendous discretion to commit American forces to protect American lives and interests. But interestingly, most interventions of a major nation, not all of them, have direct authorization from Congress, some kind of congressional resolution. This does not. In addition to the Constitution, there is also the War Powers Act of 1973. And this act requires, in the event of military action, the president must report to Congress the rationale for the action, the expected result of the action, and how long the action would take place. It remains to be seen whether Trump does that.
Okay, we have the picture, but Trump is not here yet. Okay, keep
right,
going.
we are going to give you real-time analysis and reaction to what Trump has to say. I can predict what Trump is going to say. Yeah, he's going to say, Iran must not get a nuclear weapon. It would endanger the United States and the world. We took necessary, decisive action in the interests of America and the world to prevent that from happening. Our attack was successful. Our bombers came back with no casualties, and the world is safer as a result of what I've done.
All right, here comes President Trump. It looks like J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Pete Hegseth. God, what a group.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective
except what
was
you
the
did.
destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
I want to
For
talk.
40 years, Iran has been saying...
Listen to what he just said. He opened the door to an endless war against Iran in the Middle East. He didn't say this was the end game.
That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever.
Netanyahu has resulted in vastly more civilian deaths than anything Iran has ever done.
I want to thank the
Ever?
Israeli military for the
Ever.
wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be
Notice he
either
didn't
peace.
praise the guy in charge, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth.
We have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can
Endless
be taken.
war is what he is promising, exactly contrary to what he ran for president on.
Not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just
They're going to have
say,
this press
we love you,
conference.
God,
I
and
wonder
we
if before that, Hegseth is going to reveal everything on Signal.
the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, that wasn't much of anything.
No, but what I didn't predict, and which I commented on twice, was he's promised endless war. This isn't the end game. This is the beginning, he said. We're prepared to attack Iran anywhere that we choose.
But doesn't he kind of have to say that, just in terms of now that he's already dropped bombs, he can't just be like, I'm not going to do any more. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying.
That's what happens when you start these endless military operations without a clear end game. Is the end game regime change? If the end game is solely to knock out nuclear capacities, then he could say mission accomplished. But probably he has in mind the disaster of George W. Bush and how perilous it is to claim you've completed your mission. But, you know, this is just the opposite of what Donald Trump ran on and was elected on. I just wonder if he had, come clean on what he was planning to do in Iran if he would have been elected.
Yeah. I mean, we were
his own base is against this.
Yeah, I mean, we were saying for a long time this whole idea that he started no wars and had foreign policy peace was just luck, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And this has shattered all of that completely. And as I said, except for what Trump did, we never would have been here in the first place and in this incredibly perilous position for the world. And by the way, there's no such thing as precision military operations, as we saw what happened in Gaza, tens of thousands of civilian casualties.
Well, all right.
Questions, or you have housekeeping?
We're not really doing that tonight. It's not really a regular episode.
Oh, why can't we?
I can't really. Because we have a whole structure of how we usually do it, and we just didn't have time to.
All right.
That structure.
But people can still donate, right?
Anybody can donate at any time if they want.
Yeah, and we'd appreciate that. We've, gone out of our way to get on the air and give you an unvarnished analysis of what's happening.
As opposed to a varnished one.
Yes, you just heard a varnished one.
True. All right.
All right, questions. Can we have the capacity for questions?
Will this reduce grocery prices, says President Belichick. I think he's joking.
Yeah, that's got to be the biggest. Imagine if they close the Persian Gulf. I'm not saying they will. Then, forget about prices.
What's the standing on the foreign policy success and failure key based on tonight's events?
Too early to tell. As we say, Iraq looked like a big foreign policy success early and then turned into a foreign policy disaster. So as you know, I don't like to speculate, and the devil is always in the details. And this could go either way. As we said, there are two, alpha and omega scenarios. If in fact, Iran scurries to the negotiating table and gives Trump everything he wants, then it will be a big military success. But if this turns into a long, draining war and forces boots on the ground, it will be a foreign policy military disaster. We don't know. Known unknowns, unknown unknowns.
This is from Mike Langshaw. They say, Professor, do you see 06 midterm history repeating itself to propel Dems in 26 winning a blue wave on tariffs and a war with Iran?
Very possibly. If I had to predict, and it's just happened.
Yeah, literally.
But this absolutely could lead to a big blue wave as it did in 2006. Now, remember, it took a while in Iraq. That was, Bush's second term before that happened. But events are moving vastly more quickly this time than they did in Iraq.
Thank you, John Cole, for your donation. Daniel Ray said, are you guys watching The Address? Yeah, we already watched it.
We already watched it and commented on it. And the big news, beyond what I predicted he would say, was he opened the door to an endless war in Iran.
And speaking of the endless war, even if Dems get back into the House and Senate, this is from Formeto, how do they stop him? He just dropped bombs. He didn't get any sort of congressional approval.
Well, there is the War Powers Act, which within 60 to 90 days could stop a military action, but he'll just ignore that.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting to see whether he complies with the first stage of the War Powers Act. By law, he has to report to Congress within 48 hours exactly the rationale, why he thinks it's going to succeed, and what the long-term prospects for military action are. We'll see if he complies with that.
Thank you, Veda Ra, for becoming a member. Thank you, Angela Anderson. Professor, if this is an undeclared war, what can Congress do to put a stop to this? And what can we do as Americans to put a stop to this?
As we said, Congress, in theory, could put a stop to it. But with the Republicans controlling both houses, that's very unlikely. Although there are some Republican critics. It's not like, every Republican is lined up behind what Trump is doing. And what can we, the people, do? What we did in the No Kings demonstration, which really overshadowed, undermined Trump's vanity military parade. Vote with your feet, and of course, organize and vote for 2026. And the off-year elections, got some big elections. The governor of New Jersey and the governor of Virginia. Line up for those elections. Give Trump a big black eye.
Metaphorically. Tanner Johnson says, does this guarantee a war, or is there an off-ramp?
We already talked about that. It's an unknown. It could lead to a perpetual war, or in the best case scenario, there could be an off-ramp. It's just too soon.
Falling Starcatcher, one of our members, says, Congress lets him get away with everything, so they aren't going to do a darn thing to stop him when it comes to this.
I agree with that. Republicans in Congress are not going to try to stop him, although they can under the War Powers Act. And I'm waiting to see over the next 2 days whether he complies with Phase 1 of the War Powers Act, a detailed report to Congress.
Guys, we've got almost 2,700 people watching, but only 700 likes. Make sure you like the stream, guys. That helps us a lot. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. turn that notification bell on so you know we're live.
And
Donations.
become a member.
You didn't let me finish.
Oh,
Donation
sorry.
and memberships get priority on questions. Winnie says, thank you so much for dropping such valuable knowledge, Professor. It makes the crazy more manageable.
God, I only hope so. It's very difficult to manage the crazy.
So if Iran does retaliate, what does that look like exactly?
Well, again, I'm not a military expert, but those who are military experts say there are three things that are most likely. An attack on military bases near Iran, which their short-term or medium-term missiles can reach, acts of terror against the U.S. and maybe U.S. allies, and closing down the Persian Gulf. Those are very serious acts of retaliation. I'm not predicting it. I'm just saying those are possibilities. And let's not forget, those are the known unknowns, and there are the unknown unknowns. Who knows what else could crop up?
Blazer says, this isn't Trump's war. He will blame someone else. What do you think he means by that?
Of course he will. He'll say, this was, due to the terrible foreign policies of Obama and Biden, that let Iran do this, that didn't support Israel. Of course he's going to blame anyone but himself. Trump he's my age, isn't he? 78 years old. When in his entire life of almost 80 years has he ever taken responsibility for anything?
I don't think ever.
Never, not once.
Thank you, Chris Culkins, for your donation. Brady says, I have heard that they may need boots on the ground to verify that the strike took out the Fordow facility. Trump said this is a success. Do you think Trump might be exaggerating?
I think Trump is talking, as he always does, without secure knowledge. Remember, Trump doesn't believe in truth. He wouldn't even believe his own intelligence community, which unequivocally, according to his hand-picked director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said they might have reached a nuclear threshold, but they weren't actually building a weapon. Trump just discarded that with no information whatsoever. So, yeah, if you believe everything Trump tells you, what do I have to sell you, Sam?
A bridge in your hometown of Brooklyn.
Exactly. So, it remains to be seen whether what Trump said is true or not. And we may well need boots on the ground. Maybe the Israelis have intelligence operations in Iran that could verify this, but that's dubious. And I don't see how you would verify it from the air, since Fordow is hundreds of feet below ground.
Falling Starcatcher says, do we have any more allies other than just Russia?
Yeah, Israel.
I don't know. Yeah, it might just be Israel, actually.
Might just be Israel. Russia's a phony ally, maybe an ally of Trump, but it's not an ally of the U.S. It wants to destroy our democracy and freedom.
Are we heading for World War III, says In Your Face New Yorker, ?
Well, I don't like being an alarmist. I don't think we're heading for World War III, but you never know how these things, again, unknown unknowns, how these things could expand. Unknown.
The known unknown.
Right. This is an unknown unknown.
Secular Monk says, what effect does this have on prices at the pump and the greater economy?
Well, I think in the short term, it's going to increase prices at the pump. If they close the Persian Gulf, I'm not saying they will, but they can. Then it's going to spike oil prices with not only inflation at the pump, but inflation across the economy, and greatly bail out the Russian economy.
I think even last week, when there was just some stirring about Trump maybe striking, the markets did not like that. So I can't imagine they're going to like this on Monday morning.
I wonder if there's any information about the what do they call it? The advance market. They have before the market opens, they have these advanced statistics which indicate which direction the market is likely to go.
All my hands are full, so I can't figure that out right now. Do you think leaving the JCPOA intact would have done anything to forestall Israeli aggression or not killing Soleimani?
That's pure speculation. That's not what the JCPOA was designed to do. It was working to achieve its one objective, not to turn Iran into a pro-Western democracy, not to stop Iran from sponsoring terrorism. It had one objective, to stop them from developing a nuclear weapon. And as we explained on our last show, if Trump hadn't pulled out, it was working, according to Trump's own administration, the international inspectors, which meant you'd be back at 2031 before they could even start the process of getting to the threshold, which they are now, and that would have been years from 2031.
This is from one of our members, Dorian, who's been a member for 5 months.
Wow, nice. Thank you.
Are cyber attacks a possible retaliation? Are Iran's cyber attack capabilities notable?
I'm not an expert on that. That's why I didn't, cite that. That's another one of these unknown unknowns, but I wouldn't rule it out. You got to understand, Iran is not a primitive country. It's a very advanced country. Iran is a very advanced country of 92 million persons with a long history of advanced civilization. Might they be capable of cyber attacks? It certainly wouldn't surprise me, and that could be a fourth means of retaliation.
We have over 3,000 people watching, so don't forget, like the stream. It helps us out a lot. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe and become a member. Why not?
Why not? It costs less than a milkshake. Let me add to that.
Oh, go ahead.
Another thing Trump has done is degraded our capacity to prevent and deal with cyber attacks. So we're now more open than ever before to a devastating cyber attack. And if Iran doesn't do it, who could do it, Sam?
Russia. Let's see. I thought I had Alex Kawa says, any Dems who support war must be primary. Do you agree?
Why not? Sure. But the thing is, most Republicans are insulated from primary attacks because Trump so controls the Republican primary electorate. The real target is the critical 2025 off-year elections and then the elections for House and Senate in 2026, particularly Republicans in vulnerable states and vulnerable districts.
Christopher Probst says, or asks, do you think civilians were killed in this attack?
Again, I'm not a military expert, but almost always civilians are killed in bombing attacks, so it certainly wouldn't surprise me.
I guess it's possible if these were in, if these facilities were in remote locations, and
I just don't know whether scientists and workers present in these locations
right.
when the bombs hit.
Right.
Another, this I guess is a known unknown.
Thank you, Arlen Cohen, for becoming a member. Thank you, Kathy Nelson, for gifting 5 memberships.
Nice. Thank you, Kathy.
I really appreciate that.
How much longer do you want to go?
Let's cap it out at 35 minutes. How about that?
Another 35 minutes?
No, at 35 minutes.
And how much longer is that from now?
2 minutes.
Let's go 5. Let's go 3 more questions, however long it takes.
Okay. Davis Bennett. I enjoyed the show, but it's turned into just all Trump hating. There are things that he does well, and why are you talking over Trump when he spoke?
Because we had to give you the analysis. And who else are we going to talk about tonight if not Trump? Right? Was it Obama who launched these strikes, Sam?
Well, Trump probably thinks it was Obama.
Yeah, or he thinks it's Joe Biden. This is Trump. And we had to be talking about Trump. And we gave you plenty of chance to hear what Trump has said. But, there was big news in what he said, which we needed to broadcast, and that is he signaled an openness to once again an endless war in the Middle East with no clear endpoint.
Thank you, Maria, for your donation. This was from Boy QC. They say, Professor Lichtman, Do you think this conflict could tip or escalate other international tensions, such as those between China and Taiwan, Russia and Ukraine, or even North and South Korea?
100% yes. A very perceptive comment. One of the things we've learned about wars is you can't contain them. They have all kinds of collateral effects. And if America is bogged down in an endless war in the Middle East, which Trump has signaled could happen, then that is going to profoundly affect the war in Ukraine, diminish American support, greatly enhance the ability of the Russians to conquer Ukrainian territory and even conquer Ukraine itself. Could it spark the Chinese, with Americans diverted elsewhere, to launch something they've long wanted to do, an attack on Taiwan? Absolutely. Could it spark hostilities between North and South Korea? Absolutely. These are known unknowns, but they are all possibilities. But what we do know, which is a known, wars cannot be contained. They always have collateral effects.
No doubt. All right, one more question.
Yes.
Okay. Let me see here. Dupree says, what this action by Trump has cemented is that he can't be trusted. How are countries going to believe him when cutting a deal?
Well, this is another very important point. I'm glad our brilliant audience member brought it up. One thing that Trump has squandered even before this is American credibility, right?
Yeah.
We've looked at this poll which showed China is now, imagine that China, this horrible, brutal dictatorship, is more positively regarded around the world than the United States. And I think this war in Iran is only going to further erode our credibility. It's also going to further erode something that's already in peril. Anyone believing what Donald Trump has to say, right? What Donald Trump is doing here, right or wrong even, totally contradicts the promises that he's been making for years and the promises on which he has run as critical members of his own base, including Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Marjorie Taylor Greene, some of the staunchest MAGA people have pointed out.
I will just wrap up by saying I really do hope that this does not escalate and that there is no war with Iran. Dad, what are your final words to the people tonight on this historic night?
This is an historic night. It's very perilous. I've said many times, and we've discussed this, how democracy is on the brink here. Now war is on the brink. And, as much as we disagree with Trump, we can only hope that his best case scenario does come about, that this leads to negotiations with a positive outcome, not another destructive, endless war in the Middle East, which could have calamitous consequences in the Far East and in Ukraine and on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you for the great questions.
Yes, thank you. And thank you. Dorian just put in a last-minute donation. Thank you, Dorian, for that donation. Okay, Dad. We will be back on Tuesday at our regular scheduled time, 9 p.m. Eastern, for our regular show. We came on tonight for the breaking news. Yes, sir.
One more thing. By Tuesday, we should know whether Trump has complied with the War Powers Act and provided Congress detailed justification and plans for his military action.
All right, so stay tuned. Stay locked to the channel. Make sure you're subscribed. We will see you on Tuesday.
Good night.